So we're about to go live, everybody.
Yes, I can confirm the webcast has started.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Right, let's start. I'd like to welcome you all to the meeting of the Policy and Resources Select Committee. The meeting is being held remotely and members are in attendance via video conferencing. The meeting is being live streamed and will also be available for repeated viewing. I'm very happy to start by naming the members who are in attendance for the public record. And during the meeting, if a member wishes to speak, they can indicate this to me by raising their hand and I'll call them to speak in turn. All decisions will be made, reached through the raising of hands. I think with the two items that we've got, it's unlikely we'll have to do voting, but we'll see. And I'd like to remind all the members that the County Council standing orders continue to apply. And keep your microphones muted unless you've been called to speak, and that and to remind you that you may be visible on the screen to the public and to other members even when you're not speaking. Right. The members that we have in attendance, and I'm assuming one or two might arrive while I'm doing this. We have myself, Councillor Jonathan Glenn,
Sorry,
Chairman.
Chairman, to interrupt. Can we ask, go through the attendance and ask people to confirm that they're here just for the webcast purposes?
Do you want them to do or do you want me to go through?
Yes, please. If we could confirm members' attendance by them unmuting themselves and confirming.
Right. Well, I can confirm that I'm attending. Okay. Councillor Evans.
Yep, I can confirm I'm attending. I can see and hear everything.
Very good. Councillor Adam Carew. Okay, at the moment absent. Councillor Fran Carpenter.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Adrian Collett.
Present.
Councillor Roger Huckstep.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Latham.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Anna McNair Scott.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Kirsty North.
Present, Chairman.
Very good. Councillor Russell Oppenheimer.
Present, Chairman.
Very good. Councillor Jackie Porter.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Bruce Tennant.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Michael Westbrook.
Present.
And do we have Councillor Bill Withers?
Present, Chairman.
Well done, Bill, under the wire. Thank you. Right. Louise, could I please ask for any apologies received for the meeting?
We've received no apologies, Chairman.
Right. I can inform you that Councillor Manns has apologised to me as he is at other meetings at the moment. He normally attends as the executive member for Policy and Resources, leader of the council. And I can inform you, I think they hear that we have Councillor Stephen Reid in attendance, who
Good morning, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Stephen. The executive member for Commercial Strategy, Human Resources and Performance. And do we have Councillor Judith Grajewski?
Yes, Chairman. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Judith. Thank you. Executive member for Public Health. Very apropos. Okay. I can also say that Councillor Stephen Foster has asked to observe this meeting. He's a county councillor who has a big interest in climate change issues. He has no plan to speak. So that's the people who are attending, and that's where we've got the apologies. Right, declarations of other. Does anybody know of any other apologies that I might have missed? Okay.
No, that's it, Chairman.
Declaration of interest. Right, we normally disclose any declarations when we get to the item in question, but are there any of you that wish to disclose any interests at this point?
Yes, please.
Right, you are.
I'm the City Councillor Cabinet Member for the Built Environment and Wellbeing, and so it's the non-prejudicial interest, but it's certainly something in which we also, as a district council, will be required to be working in parallel with the county council.
Thank you very much, Councillor Porter. Anybody else got a hand up to for any interest you might to disclose right now? Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I can't find my hand up button. But anyway,
do that.
Yes, very quickly. I should record, it's non-pecuniary, but I'm actually Hampshire County Council's trustee for WINAC. And WINAC is one of the organisations that Chitra and others have been working with in terms of climate change policy and data.
So what does WINAC stand for?
It stands for Winchester Action on Climate Change.
Oh, right, okay, thank you very much indeed, that's interesting. Right, you are. Right, deputations. I think I've basically covered all my announcements. What I want to say is that we have two major items today. The first one on climate change, which is the sort of living document that we live with, is I can hear myself. Is a living document and basically looks at the long-term continuity of basically everything we know and love, and we are here to ensure that the Cabinet and the Council continue to update it and to enhance all the mitigation measures that are going to be required now in 2050. The second item, which is the medium-term financial strategy update, which is going to be quite heavy reading for us all, is dealing with a slightly shorter term, but really deals with the longevity and the ability to finance projects from here on in, certainly over the next couple of years. And I'm actually looking forward to hearing from our Treasury Officer on that one. So those are my opening announcements. I would like to know if we've got any deputations. I haven't heard that we do, but Dams, could you please confirm?
No deputations received, Chairman.
Okay. Right, on to the first major item, the climate change strategy. We have...
Sorry to interrupt, Chairman. Before we do, can we go back and confirm the minutes from the last meeting, which are added as a supplementary?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have to go back to the other... Yeah, you're dead right. I do apologise. Right, the minutes of the last meeting, have you got them in front of you? We've got... this is the meeting of the 25th of June, 2020. We have, just for correction, page 1, page 2, Serving Hampshire, performance report, page 3, the annual report of the select committees, which were put to the full council, and our work programme on page 3. Are there any comments arising from accuracy? I don't see any hands up. Do I assume you can do it by a show of hands that you're all in agreement with the minutes of the 25th? Everybody happy? Thank you very much. Right, Louise, is that covered?
That's it, thank you.
I do apologise. Okay. Right. Climate change strategy. We have James Potter, the Assistant Director, Chitra Nadaraja, Strategic Manager for Climate Change from the Economy, Transport and Environment Department, to introduce and give a presentation on the Climate Change Strategy Report, which was agreed by Cabinet at its meeting in July. There's a whole series of issues. The one that I'd like to draw your attention to is in paragraph 10, where the baseline emissions are industry and commerce 38.89%, transport baseline emissions 36.98%, domestic emissions 23.66%, and waste which is surprising, is only 0.46%. So I'm not going to steal the thunder. Over to you, members of staff, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good morning, councillors. I'm going to give a very brief introduction and then hand over to Chitra to run you through some of the headlines and the details. The paper before you is the culmination of a year-long piece of work by a small team within ETE, but also sort of input from colleagues across the whole of the county council, as well as engagement with stakeholders across the whole of the county. It was presented to Cabinet, or the strategy was presented to Cabinet in July, a year after the declaration of a climate emergency by the council, and the action plan, which is also set out in the papers, will go to Cabinet later this month for final sign-off. I'll now hand over to Chitra to run through the details of that, but also some of the other projects that we're doing on a sort of community basis.
Thank you very much. That was James, I assume, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Good morning. It's Chitra Nadaraja, Strategic Manager for Climate Change. I believe you all have the presentation that was circulated, so I'm just going to run through that, and I'll try and go through it, not too swiftly, but to give you enough time to have a good discussion afterwards.
Absolutely, Chitra. I'd like to take your time. I think this is something that we'd like to drill into, so please take your time.
Okay, so the presentation summary in slide 2.
Sorry, before Chitra starts, did you say that we had a presentation to look at, not just the report?
Yes, that's right. I think
I don't have that on my iPad.
Is it at the end? Is it not at the very end of the agenda?
I can share my screen if that's better.
It's on my iPad, Chairman, on mod.gov at the end.
Right, okay. I'll see if I can find it. Sorry to interrupt.
So the summary just sets out the sort of key points that I want to highlight that were presented to Cabinet in July, and also the work that we're doing now towards the next Cabinet meeting, as James said, at the end of this month. So a lot of the climate change work started back with the Hampshire 2050 work. So we felt that when we presented the strategy, it was really important that we sort of acknowledge that the Hampshire 2050 is sort of almost the overarching basis for a lot of this work. The Hampshire 2050 Commission report highlighted climate change as the most important driver for change in Hampshire, and it recognised that we really needed to be well adapted and resilient and contribute to reducing emissions. So that's kind of front and centre of the climate change strategy, and quite an important component of the work that we've been doing going forward with the wider public sector and the Hampshire 2050 partnership. So we also have 2 targets as an authority that is quite unique in terms of local government set climate emergency targets. We've got the 2050 target for carbon neutrality, and that's not just for the county council's own assets, that's for the whole of the Hampshire area. And we've got a second target, which is the unique one, which is to be resilient to a 2-degree rise in temperature. And this is really recognising that climate change is happening, that we're already facing some of the impacts of climate change, and that because of the role that we play in terms of our services to the public, it's really important that we ensure our infrastructure, environment and communities are prepared for those impacts, alongside trying to reduce, obviously, future climate impacts by having the 2050 carbon neutral target. So the vision and the policy set out in the climate change strategy come from the 2050 work. So we didn't want to kind of create a new vision and policy. We took it from the work that we did with the 2050. So recognising climate change as the biggest threat, and a well-adapted and resilient Hampshire will be essential to ensure that Hampshire's economy, environment and society continues to thrive and prosper. And our policy will be to develop and promote a focus on embedding climate resilience and mitigation across all of our key policy sectors, and working with communities. So hopefully that you'll see that come through in the rest of the strategy. So the way this strategy is set out is we had what we call a set of key principles. So this is really things that we wanted to underpin our approach. And I think this is quite important for us as a local government authority to have some of these principles, because I think it's important to set out right from the start how we want to approach our climate change action. So carbon hierarchy is the first one, and that's very much about saying that we'll follow a sort of simple hierarchy, a bit like the waste hierarchy. So, starting with trying to avoid creating emissions in the first place, and the last sort of the least priority would be offsetting. Very important in terms of co-benefits, again, because of our role as a public sector organisation, we need to make sure that as many of our actions deliver co-benefits, such as reducing congestion, improving air quality, health benefits, economic benefits, etc. Again, another really critical principle is about proportionality, affordability, and equitability. Climate change does tend to impact on those vulnerable elements of our society, so it's really important that we understand that, but also that we deliver action in line with the fact that we're here to deliver services for the public good. So we will have to take a proportionate response, and we will make sure it's also affordable given some of the pressures that we've had financially. The 2050 target has also obviously been aligned with the national government target. However, the reason we have a strategy that only goes up to 2025 and an action plan that only goes to 2025 is to give us the opportunity to review that on a regular basis. So our target is 2050, but everything is up to 2025 at the moment. And again, that's about kind of being able to accelerate where appropriate, being able to move things faster if we can, but also to be continuously reviewing that. And we also have to acknowledge that a lot of what we do will be dependent on national government funding or policy changes and the availability of resources. There's a couple of other principles I talked about. National government policy and funding is kind of a key area for us. A lot of the emissions that sit within the county council area are very limited in terms of our control. So we will need to use the levers out there, but we'll also need help from national government to kind of create the funding and the policy landscape that could support those actions. Coming back to sort of 2050, digital innovation was something that we thought was really key to kind of highlight here. Technology will be an enabler. I mean, we've seen that happen with COVID-19 and the massive shift away from working in offices to working from home, and how quickly sort of digital has allowed us to step into that space. So we really need to make sure that we prioritize the development and delivery of innovation and digital to support the climate change agenda. And that's everything from things like electrification through to hydrogen, but encouraging that, but also not relying on that completely. So having a balance. So the first piece of work that we did in terms of the strategy was to set out our baseline carbon emissions. These are taken from the national government emissions data. So that's done by the government department BAYS. And what we've done is we've done a more sort of local level assessment of that with the Carbon Trust, who we've hired to kind of help us and support us do this work. So based on that more detailed local assessment, these are the final figures, where we're looking at 38% for industrial and commercial, 36% for transport, and 23% as laid out by the chairman earlier. Again, this was quite surprising, because I think earlier when we did it on a very sort of national level breakdown, transport was the highest emission. So really helpful to have done this more local piece of work and to get a much more detailed breakdown. Behind this very simple graph and very simple figures sits a lot of information and a very sort of in-depth breakdown of the emissions that we have done on a district level. So we've been able to share that with all of the district councils, so they can use this work and disaggregate the emissions, so that they can kind of hopefully benefit from the work that we've done. Essentially, this doesn't really change the big picture. We knew that these were the top areas that we would have to work on, but obviously it does shift a little bit, that our focus on industrial and commercial needs to be kind of built up. So sticking with the sort of key areas, what we've developed is a set of what we're calling strategic priorities. So these are the key sectors that we will need to focus on to reduce our emissions, but also to build resilience. And under each of these strategic priorities, we've kind of created a set of priority areas and also looked at what we're already doing, and that also helped to identify where the gaps are. So these are the key strategic priority areas, so organizational emissions and resilience. Now, I've not talked too much about this because I think a lot of the work that we've done over the last 10 years has focused on reducing the emissions within our own assets, and the property services have done a brilliant job, and we're really on track, and we're probably on track to sort of, go beyond the targets. So that work is really progressing well. But what we've focused on in this work is what we call Scope 3 emissions, which are far more challenging and sit within the areas of, say, procurement and some of the services we deliver in partnership. So that's something that we've drawn into this particular strategy and into this action plan that takes us beyond the work that we've been focusing on for the last 10 years. The other strategic priorities are very much around the Hampshire area. So you've got transport, residential, buildings and infrastructure, energy generation and distribution, waste and circular economy, natural environment, and business and green economy. These are fairly standard, there's nothing surprising here, but it gives us a really solid framework to base our action plan on and base future work on, and partnership working as well. Which leads me on to partnerships. Now, a lot of what we do, we don't have a huge amount of control over those emissions in those areas. Obviously, transport is somewhere we can have some influence, and residential, but partnership working will really be critical to us delivering our targets. And we have got a really good working relationship at the moment with our Hampshire district and borough councils and the wider public sector. We've got a number of existing partnerships that have been going for many, many years. We've got the Climate Change Officers Group that's been running for over 15 years, that we've really been able to reinvigorate and engage with the districts and boroughs and work very closely with them on this strategy and the action plan, and will continue to do so. We're also obviously working through the Hampshire 2050 partnership that will oversee this sort of collective delivery against our commitments. So moving on to the action plan, which we published a 45-page action plan in the Cabinet report in July. This action plan was really based on all of the activity taking place across the whole of the authority on carbon reduction resilience, and we spent a number of months engaging with the entire organisation to collect all of this information. As an organisation, we've been working on climate change for many years, so we knew that there was going to be a lot of activity already taking place, and we wanted to capture that, but we also wanted to give those parts of our organisation the opportunity to reconsider what they were doing on climate change, and also look to kind of challenge them to go further. So that is the 45-page action plan that was put forward in July, and it really highlighted really the depth and the range of work already taking place. We have recognised that action plan, although it is extensive and very detailed, will not help us meet our targets in totality. So we have to undertake a sort of gap analysis, and that's the work that we've been continuing to do with the Carbon Trust and with a number of different organisations and events between July and the Cabinet paper at the end of this month. So we'll be presenting the kind of outcomes of that on the 29th. But just to kind of give you a taster of that, we've held a really successful engagement event with community groups. I think there were 65 attendees, 40 organisations, and they came back with over 200 suggestions about the sorts of things that they would want to see in an action plan. And what we've been able to do is sort of map that against our existing action plan, but also take that into consideration into that gap analysis. And that gap analysis has developed into what we're calling the strategic framework of programmes, which essentially is looking at each of those strategic priorities that I outlined previously: transport, residential, buildings, etc., and looking at where the gaps are that we need to take action to meet our targets. So those will be quite significant programs of activity that will be very long term, very much kind of dependent on partnership working, and also very dependent on funding resources, national government, for us to deliver. But those will be presented to Cabinet at the end of the month. So just to run through the next steps, as I said, we'll be completing the action plan and the strategy, which will go to Cabinet at the end of the month. And we'll then begin to start rolling out these two key decision tools. So I think right back in January, when we first kind of came to Cabinet with the climate change work, we agreed that we would put together a set of tools that will help us assess all key decisions going to key council meetings against climate change targets. So those two tools are being developed at the moment, and they'll be ready for the end of September, and we will be rolling them out across the organisation. They are actually quite an innovative approach. Again, I think this is something that a lot of authorities haven't done. They are quite complex. They're not the simplest tools, because we have to really be robust and we have to be transparent about the way that we're making decisions. So there'll be lots of training, lots of online help to help officers understand how to use these tools. But this is really also going to be an educational process, and will really support officers to understand how everything that they do contributes to climate change or needs to take account of some of those impacts of climate change. We'll also be developing an expert stakeholder forum. So we had that very large meeting I talked about in August, and we're picking out a number of organisations within that to form part of a smaller expert group that will provide us with ongoing support, challenge, and basically expert knowledge and that sort of connection with those community groups. So we're hoping to set that up after the Cabinet meeting in October. And then we'll be starting the monitoring process. So we'll be reporting on the action plan on an annual basis, and that will go back to Cabinet in October next year. So after Cabinet in September this year, we'll start the monitoring process and establishing how that's going to take place. And we'll probably be using the Climate Change Board as a mechanism for delivering that across the different departments. And we've also launched a number of residential projects. Now, as I said, residential emissions are some of the highest emissions, and we have sort of very limited control over them. So we are really focusing our attention on engaging with residents in terms of both awareness raising, but also projects. So from an awareness raising perspective, you'll see as part of the Cabinet papers that went in July, there was an extensive report on behavioural insights. So we've done a lot of research, we've done focus groups, we've done surveys, and through all of that work, we've got a really solid evidence base of how we can engage with our residents on awareness campaigns, on marketing campaigns, and that's going to support the rollout of the climate change work for many years. And that's a really critical component of us engaging with residents to raise their awareness, to get them to take action. But the other side of it is to really engage on a grassroots project level. So we have 4 projects that we have launched now. The first was the greening campaign, which we launched quite a few months ago. Obviously with COVID, some of the delivery of that has been slightly changed and delayed, but this is very much about sort of grassroots delivery, taking individuals within their own homes to look at what they can do to have an impact on climate change. And there are 7 phases, and each phase lasts up to 1 year. So this is a long-term program that we're committing to. And it takes them from their home right through to community planning actions. The sort of delivery of this is being overseen by the district and borough councils and the parish councils. So they're really kind of taking that on and moving forward with that in a really successful way. The further projects that we launched in July was a free phone telephone advice line from the Environment Centre. So this is really critical in terms of helping residents feel that they've got a safe place that they can go for advice on the sorts of things they might want to do to improve the energy efficiency of their home, insulation, working with community groups, etc. And this will obviously be really critical if there are any big funding announcements from national government, say for big retrofit schemes, that we will be able to use this phone line to really support residents when we do things like that. We're also creating a community energy network. We recognise that renewable energy in Hampshire is very low, so we want to kind of encourage the growth of renewable energy, and we really want to encourage that from a community energy perspective, not just in terms of big private companies, but we want communities to get involved. So this is really working with Community Energy South to support local communities to build their capacity and to develop community energy projects. And we hope that by the end of this sort of first phase of the project, we will have a pilot community energy project that will be starting up. And finally, we've got a targeted solar buying scheme. So this is really a sort of reverse auction for those homeowners that we'll be targeting who can afford to buy high quality solar PV at competitive price. And it gets them a better deal by sort of doing it together. And it means that we will have pre-vetted suppliers and the lowest supplier wins. But these sorts of schemes that have been done across the country always tend to favour local suppliers. So this is really good in terms of building up the green economy as well. So that's something that we'll be rolling out in the end of this year. But I think the way that I choose to do it is they kind of run a number of campaigns across the year. So we'll have a good opportunity for a lot of our residents, hopefully, to buy into this. And this is also being done in light of COVID, so there shouldn't be any delays if we have any further issues. And then finally, just at the end of the presentation, I've provided a whole set of links because we have got a website now that has extensive information on all of the work I've talked about today, and obviously we'll continue to update that and make sure that all of the information goes up there after the Cabinet meeting. That was my presentation.
Right. Chitra, thank you very much indeed for that. It was quite a rush through. Can I just say that having read through this report about 4 or 5 times for this meeting, it's an extraordinary piece of work, actually, especially when you start needing a microscope to look at the small print towards the end, okay? So forgive me and maybe others here for not having gone through the whole lot prior to your presentation. We'll certainly want you back at the right times, probably to hone in on some of the stuff that we really haven't got our teeth into, and we'll need your help to highlight it for us, okay? And before, I don't see any hands up yet, but when we do get hands, I'd like to thank your team right now. That's Jonathan Baker and Laura Baker, Robert Ormerod, Philippa Mellish, and the Insights and Engagement Unit for that extraordinary report you've done. So would you please make sure that's passed on from the Policy and Resources Committee. And before I bring anybody in, can I just ask, with the Expert Stakeholders Forum, will you be including Councillor Warwick?
Yes, she will chair it.
Okay, right, Joe. Will there be any other councillors being asked to be experts there?
No, it will be mainly members of community groups. So okay. Hampshire Climate Action Network, Extinction Rebellion, universities, those sorts of people.
So Councillor Warwick is our main contact. Okay. One minor thing which I'd like to think about, I'm on the pension panel. We're very hot on ESG, environment, social and governance, which I know is not your remit. But I think at some point, the ESG debate is getting hotter and hotter. Compliance is getting stronger and stronger. The investment houses are having to really drill into the areas where they've got to, where they basically invest money in companies. And I would hope that maybe this might become an item for us to look at a later date on the Policy and Resources Committee. Okay, I'll stop there with ideas. The first hand up, let's start with Fran, okay? I haven't got, yeah, Fran, Councillor Fran Carpenter.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm not sure I was first, but that's.
No, I'm just working here as best I can.
That's fine. That's all right. Yes, I just think the work that you've done, Chitra, as Jonathan said, is just phenomenal on this. It's just amazing. I've been looking at all the detailed reports at the end of your report as well, and all the behavioural change information, and it's well worth digging into. And the work that you've done on, well, I suppose it's a cumulative amount of work that people have done, different departments and things on how people react to different aspects of climate change. They're willing to try to modify their food and purchasing food, but not so other bigger issues. That's going to be quite hard to overcome. But my question is, the greening campaign particularly, are all the districts, towns and parishes, I know COVID and it's been interrupted, have they all been briefed as much as they can be? Do you have a plan to reinforce that? Because I spoke to my towns and parishes just this week about it, and though one or two had heard, I've got quite a big area, they've heard about it, they're not really sure what it is, they haven't engaged with it yet. How are you going to roll that out? And are all the districts on board?
Yes, so essentially when we presented this to the district climate change group, they asked if they could lead on rolling it out, and we sort of agreed with that because obviously they have a much closer relationship with their parishes and they wanted to be able to kind of manage that process, which we think is a great idea. So we've kind of left it to the districts to roll out. So yes, not all of the districts have signed up to it. I think East Hants have said that they've got other things that they would be focusing on. So they won't be rolling out the greening campaign in their area, but most of the other districts are either already progressing with it or definitely looking to progress with it. So yes, there has been obviously a delay because ultimately quite a lot of the rollout with the greening campaign is not sending someone a piece of paper and asking them to read something. It is about coming together as a community, agreeing your targets as a community, and then working together as a community to deliver them. So obviously that's been a bit challenging with COVID. And I know Tarina Plowright, who runs the greening campaign, has been modifying some of the messages, sending out alternative activities to the districts that are already sort of rolling that out. So yeah, it's not happened as quickly and as extensively as we could have hoped for because of COVID, but it's certainly happening. And it will obviously take a bit of time to roll out more extensively, but we'll continue to engage with the districts and continue to promote that work through the district group.
Back to you, Councillor Carpenter.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's maybe something that councillors themselves, county councillors, can really get involved in to try and encourage the districts and towns and parishes in their areas. Thank you very much. It's wonderful. Thanks.
If I might just follow up, are we going to work on East Hampshire? Chitra?
We're working with East Hampshire. They are a very active part of our climate change officers group. They've got alternative actions that they want to do with their residents. We're by no means forcing the greening campaign on everyone. We're giving it as a really good option because it just provides a really easy, accessible methodology. But we're not, obviously there are many other ways in which we can engage with residents. This was just one that we felt really ticked the boxes for us, and a lot of the districts agreed. So yeah, East Hants are progressing well on other areas. So
okay, well that's good. Right, Councillor Oppenheimer. I'm just going to go down the list as I've got them here. Councillor Oppenheimer.
Thank you, Chairman. Just following on from that point, the greening campaign started in East Hampshire, and towns like Petersfield and Alton did it 10 years ago, and that was why we felt we don't need to go down that road again. But it can be a useful tool, so I support it. I'd like to welcome the report and the action plan. I think it's very comprehensive and very thorough, and there's a lot of great stuff in it. I particularly like the emphasis on co-benefits. We're a strategic committee, so we love things. We love actions where we can actually have multiple benefits across different parts of the organisation. And I think it's very good that you've focused on things like air quality and how we can achieve benefits there. There's one co-benefit that I'm particularly fond of, which is that if you put solar panels on the roofs of schools, you can save that school up to £30,000 a year from their budget, and that money goes straight into the classroom. So it's a really, really worthwhile co-benefit to achieve. Now, you've got an action in your action plan, which is continuation of schools' energy programme. So you've got it there. But what I'd like to suggest, and I know the action plan is going to be a living document, that I think when you do your next iteration of the action plan, I'd like to see more detail alongside that action. We should really be putting rocket boosters under the school's energy programme. We've got a great team there. I've engaged with them, and they're very experienced and knowledgeable. And I think if we gave them more support, more resources, they could actually achieve something quite remarkable. And now's the time. The government's got this public sector decarbonisation fund, which can provide funding for school solar. We could actually get solar panels on every school in Hampshire, and that would be a good action to put in your action plan. And I think that you'd have widespread support from that, from all councillors on this committee. So that's what I wanted to suggest.
Very good, Russell. Chitra.
Yes, actually, Steve Clow and I met earlier this week about exactly that. So I guess the difficulty with the 45 pages is that we couldn't include all of the detail of what actually sits under each of those actions, because then it would probably be 450 pages and nobody would be able to read it. So yeah, I do take your point. The kind of detail is not all there, but believe me, there's a lot of detail that sits beneath each of those actions. And Steve is going to be looking at the funding and how we can help schools kind of take up that offer. And we'll also be looking at the Community Energy South project to work with schools. So we're meeting again this week, next week, sorry, with Community Energy South and Steve Close's team, particularly around schools, particularly around solar PV. So.
Back to you, Russell.
Well, that's good to hear. And we'll keep an eye on that one when we see the next version of the action plan. And I hope you'll be able to put a target date for actually getting solar panels on, say, first 50% of Hampshire schools and then 100%. Let's give ourselves an ambitious target for that, I would suggest.
Yeah. I'm going to stay on solar panels. Now, any of the hands up wanted to talk about solar paneling? Just show it on your, put your hand up. Well, I've got a question, because what about listed properties? Can listed properties get solar paneling put on their roofs at the moment? Do we know?
Sorry, what properties?
Listed properties.
I think it depends. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, so I'm not going to pretend to know the answer, but I think it depends on the property. So yeah, it would be part of the process of the business case development. So if we were to roll out the solar PV iChooser, they would know the answers to that and they would be able to do that.
Okay, we'll watch that one. Okay, Councillor Huckstep.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On solar panels and schools, not all the schools are actually suitable for solar panels. So it won't ever be 100%, but it should be made to be as close as possible. And we need to remember that Hampshire is actually one of the sunniest parts of the UK. So we really ought to be majoring on solar panel power.
Okay. Thank you for your comment, Councillor Porter. I have been told that solar panels don't have to be on roofs. Okay, right. Right. Yeah, I'm always being corrected.
Then you lose playing fields.
Yeah, that's right. Chitra, did you want to add to that? Okay.
No, that's exactly right.
Okay. Right, we'll go on to Councillor Porter.
Just my personal solar panels are not on a roof, so there you are. They're above a vegetable patch. Just to say, I've got 2 or 3 points. One is I was really interested on page 123 of your presentation, or it's in the presentation. It's not all actions are carbon equal, and it's the number of people needed to take the action for the same carbon reduction. And then you look at the climate action willingness from the public, and each climate action has a closely related action. So mine's really about hearts and minds, really, because it's a brilliant report and there's loads and loads of action there. But it's a bit like having so many things. Do we have within the county council's financial capabilities the project management to do all of these things at the same time? So the 2 or 3 things I just was going to tie up really with is, in my division, I've got quite a few oil wells. Small, but nevertheless oil wells that have licenses, and they work with EA, and water's pumped in and oil's pumped out. And I wondered if we were just going to, as part of the minerals and waste plan, say we won't accept any more licensing for oil drilling. That was the first one, because it would be a simple matter that isn't in this list, but it's something the county council could have a real influence on. And the second one was about electric cars. We're putting in a lot of EV charging, which is absolutely brilliant. And but I've got an electric car, and I've only ever used an EV charger once outside my own home. The rest of the time, it's actually powered by my own solar panels, so through a battery. So is there a way in which we can press the public to use electric cars more often? So my question really is, can we push up the list to make sure people understand what the top 10 issues are, rather than the bottom 5? Because actually using less water, turning off the tap and brushing your teeth, it takes 229 of us to achieve the same thing. I just wondered how we're going to put this to the public to try and make sure that they really think about the points they're going to be trying to take up, because obviously the county council's got its own role in actual taking actions, but we're asking the public to take these actions too. And I noticed that in the second part, there's willingness to take action, and avoiding flights has got only about half of the people. So people are not prepared to give up their international flights if it means it's saving their carbon footprint. So that's the first section. And the second one I was going to mention was that a mitigation. Where in the hierarchy does mitigation come? Because the last few weeks of very heavy water flow and having something like a month's worth of water in 25 minutes was an enormous challenge to the county council. So it was an enormous cost as well. So where does that mitigation come in the hierarchy?
Yeah. Chitra, have you got all that? There's really two questions there, aren't there?
I'll start with the second one because that's an easy one. So the mitigation in the hierarchy is reduce. So avoid, reduce, replace, offset. So anything that reduces the amount of carbon emissions is basically mitigation. So that sits squarely, so reduce and replace is mitigation, even avoid is mitigation. The whole, if that was what your question was.
No, it's more like, how do you deal with the water that lands on the ground?
So that's the resilience side of it, you mean?
Yes.
Okay, so that sits within the resilience target of how are we going to prepare ourselves for the impacts of climate change and build resilience. And obviously flooding is one of the highest impacts in Hampshire. So that sits within the flood and water management team's responsibility to look at the resilience element of that.
Right, okay.
And I think that's probably a good point to kind of say that, as you can imagine, the extensive action plan does not sit within the remit of my team. It sits within the remit of the whole organization. So a lot of the detail within that action plan won't be within my gift to give you all the answers to, because otherwise I'd have to know everything about everything, which is not possible, sadly. So I'll do my best to answer the questions. So going back to the behavioral insights work, I think it's really important to state that that work is not going to dictate what we do. It's only there to give us a good sort of robust evidence base. So when we decide to run a campaign, to do a piece of work, we can refer back to that insights work to get a better understanding of how we would do it, right, what success factors are, etc. So we're certainly not going to be targeting actions based purely on that report. Most likely, we're going to be targeting actions based on the emissions profile. So we're looking at, if we look at residential emissions, we're looking at how we can help residents reduce emissions within their own homes. So for example, we're already planning a campaign for this winter around sort of how we help residents think about improving the energy efficiency within their homes, given that maybe quite a few of them will continue to be working from home through the winter, so might see an increase in their energy bills. So I think it's just keeping the context of that report as very much almost like a piece of research that really helps us understand, be robust, but it certainly won't be driving what we do in terms of the prioritization. The prioritization will absolutely come from the emissions profile and will also come from where we can have the biggest influence, where we can take the action, and also where there are opportunities. So if government funding suddenly becomes available, that will become a sort of top priority in terms of being able to pull that funding down and deliver significant action. So it's a bit of a balance between the two. It's there to help us. It's not there to dictate.
Back to you.
The license for the licenses under the Minerals and Waste Plan.
James can get on.
Chairman, if I may come in on that, that would be something for consideration as part of a review of the County Council and our partners' Minerals and Waste Plan, which is due to sort of, I think, come forward with proposals before the end of the year for a refresh and review of that plan. I'm not sure it's going to be a wholesale rewrite of it, but it's definitely going to be looked at. So any proposals for changing policy with regards to licensing of oil wells, etc., or planning for those would be part of that process.
Thank you.
Okay, now I noticed hands going up whilst this debate was going on. Was there anybody in our group wanting to add to this part of the debate rather than have their own agenda, which we're ready to look at, because they had their hand up earlier? So, I mean, for example, Anna McNair-Scott, your hand went up during the debate. Do you want to talk about this issue?
Yes, it is about this issue.
Okay, Anna, you go ahead.
No, it's really one of the things that worries me about electric cars is they're still incredibly expensive. And so, yes, well-to-do people can do it, but it's very difficult for other people. And the other thing is that so many of our emissions on roads, and I know from Basingstoke that actually speed limits are being lowered in certain bits in order to make sure that the emissions are less serious. And a lot of that's to do with speed. I had a friend who was had to do a speed awareness course because he was exceeding a 50-mile-an-hour limit on the motorway, which he couldn't see why it was there because there was no crash or anything. And it actually turned out that it's because they were lowering the speed on the motorway because emissions were going up. And there's been no sort of publicity about that. And I would have thought that was something that would be really good. And you could, because there's no doubt that diesel lorries are emitting far worse fumes than a lot of other road users. But I think some more publicity on that might help and make people drive slower.
I suppose you just say yes to that, Chitra, will you?
Yes, yeah, thank you. Again, I think we are what we need to do is sort of map out all of the different things that we want to engage with the public on, because there's an overwhelming amount of information to talk to them about and to raise their awareness of. So what we're trying to do is align our campaigns with key policy changes or key interventions. So for example, when the local transport plan, the 4th local transport plan goes out to consultation, what we're going to try and do is align some of the messages to the public alongside that consultation process. So that may well be one of the messages that comes out during that time about reducing speed and how that helps with emissions, but and obviously how the LTP is very much about avoiding having to drive at all rather than electric vehicles.
Well, exactly.
So yes,
there's
a huge package of loads of different things that we need to be bringing to the public's attention, but what we don't want to do is overwhelm or bombard. So we've got to be quite strategic about and how those messages come through. But yes, absolutely.
Back to you, Anna, on this point.
No, that's fine. And my only fear about electric cars too, that if everybody had them, there would have to be an awful lot of electricity available, which we might still be using oil to produce. So right. I mean, it's slightly two-edged, and maybe the research that's being done on other forms of fuel, like say ammonia or hydrogen and oxygen or whatever, are even more important.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, electric vehicles is one of many parts of the sort of picture that we're trying to promote, and we've certainly always said that it's very likely that electric vehicles is a transitional technology.
Yeah.
And it might be something like hydrogen in the future. So I think it's those that can, we obviously would like to encourage them, but it's actually more about public transport and avoidance of travel in the first place. That walking, cycling, or health benefits of that's going to be our more kind of significant focus.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, both of you. Councillor Westbrook, now you've had your hand up already. For some time, but you've waved to say you want to add to this part of the debate.
Yeah, yes, Chairman. Not many to jump my term. I'm happy to wait for my other questions, but I did have one point to make on electric vehicles. I'm currently aware of someone I was speaking to that had a Tesla, who had a purpose-built in charger inside their own property. Regularly made trips from Poole to Essex. They've just sold their vehicle actually. One of the main reasons is if you go from Poole to Essex, you'll find that you can recharge your vehicle to do so many 100 miles at Fleet Service Station when you're going to Essex. But if you are coming back, the only way you can charge it between there and Poole is if you go north of the M25 to South Mims. Now, this becomes then an infrastructure project, which is to do with obviously national government and businesses, because you've got fast charge points which people want to make it convenient for their journeys. It's never going to work if people can't do the distance and need the charging points. And I think that's something we have to bear in mind. It's not just about the will to have electric vehicles and do it. People were put off by having electric vehicles and are even selling their vehicles because that's not in place.
It is about confidence. Okay. Chitra, do you want to reply to any of that?
No, I think that's a fair point, and obviously there's a lot of focus on infrastructure, but also a lot of focus on the battery technology developing quite rapidly. So the mileage range is going up quite significantly, but it's an affordability issue. But I guess if the market is demanding that, then that will bring the price down. But yeah, I mean, those are all issues that I think everyone is very aware of, and we're doing our bit to support that infrastructure network.
Councillor, did you want to add to this?
No, that's fine, Chairman. I'll wait for my other questions when everybody's had their turn.
Councillor Latham, you
Sorry
put
to
your hand up
interrupt,
all of a sudden.
Sorry to interrupt, Chairman. I think Councillor Collett was first on the list.
I
so-
know I know, but he's got something else, I presume. Councillor Latham's hand went up, I think, and I want to know if it's about this subject.
Chairman, I'm happy to wait.
Yeah. Is Peter there? Right, his hand's gone down. Okay, right, over to you, Councillor Collett.
Thank you, and thank you to Louise for making sure I wasn't overlooked. Can I start by apologising to Chitra for not spotting that the presentation was in fact one of the appendices on the report. I looked at it at the time but didn't realise that's what it was. The report is excellent. It's very heartwarming to see this happening. As the seconder of the motion for the climate emergency just over a year ago, I'm so pleased to see that we're making this progress. It's an issue that's been a key one for me since I first read about climate change in 1976 and was a motivator for me to get involved in public life. Some years ago, I attended a conference in Southampton where BP had a stall promoting solar energy. This was about 15 years ago. I was rather surprised to see this. So I questioned the guy as to what their strategy was. And he said, it's the future. It's where we will end up going, renewable energy. And he explained to me, he said, if you were to build a solar farm in the middle of the Sahara Desert, 100 miles square, you'd need lots of security, of course. He said, but that would harness more than twice as much energy as the whole of humanity uses on the planet. And he said that gives you the scale of the amount of solar energy that is hitting our planet every day. We just need to find viable ways of harnessing that and getting away from the damaging fossil fuels and so on that are causing all the problems. And that's the sort of challenge that is in front of us. And I think of things like solar panels on roofs, and I ask myself, why aren't solar panels the roof covering of choice in our building regulations now? Why aren't we making that sort of move where we could really start making serious progress if that sort of thing was going on? But I realise that's outside our remit, Chairman. But the 2050 target is considered by many to be dangerously slow. Now, I recognise that's the government's target, and I recognise what Chitra explained, that when we do our reviews, we will look for opportunities to speed up the progress we make. And I really do hope that we do that. In the early days, I guess it's a matter of grabbing the low-hanging fruit and getting the things that can be done more easily at this stage. I don't understand, for example, why we're switching our streetlights back on at 4 a.m. How many people need streetlights on at 4 a.m.? We've achieved a broad consensus about switching our streetlights off at night when they're not needed. So why can't we quite easily make some very good more progress on that? But I suppose that the big question I want to ask, and maybe it's one that Chitra can't easily answer, but throughout the report, reference is made to affordability, being able to do things as and when we can. What are we planning to do about harnessing the resources need to make sure that the things we need to do are affordable? That can be both within our own resources, with the transfer of resources that are being spent on other things, and indeed support from government, who of course control how much our budget is. They control the grant on the one hand and the council tax limit on the other. and we've been facing many years of severe austerity and budget reductions. So how are we going to make sure we can genuinely afford to do all of this? I trust it's something that some thought has been given to. Thank you, Chairman.
Chitra.
Yes, it is a challenge, and I think that's why the initial 45-page action plan is about making sure that we try and embed climate change in everything that we do. So we consider what we can deliver every single time we take some sort of policy decision or deliver an action, because it has actually gone slightly beyond the low-hanging fruit at this stage, because we've been working on this for quite a long time. So I think we've probably done quite a lot of the low-hanging fruit. So we're moving into the sort of more challenging areas. I guess the tricky bit is that, as I said, even all of those actions in the 45-page action plan does not help us meet our targets. There's still a significant gap, and that is why this is so challenging, and that is why we've got that 2050 target, because even if we kind of up the ante on everything within that 45-page action plan, we would not get anywhere closer to meeting our target, because it's ultimately the huge emissions that are coming out of transport, of residential homes, and of business and industry, as you can see, over which we have quite limited control. So we can't stop people getting in their cars. We can encourage them not to. We can provide alternative solutions. We can talk about healthy lifestyles, but we can't physically stop them, and we can't certainly tell them not to buy petrol or petrol vehicles. And the same with residential. You know, we can provide as much support as possible. We can encourage, but to retrofit an average home that is, let's say, a sort of not a good energy rating is probably upwards of £10,000 per home. So that's, again, not something that the County Council can commit to doing on a broad scale, which is where we would need the government funding to come in. So unfortunately, a lot of the areas that will really make those big jumps to get us to meet those targets are very resource intensive and very challenging to meet, because they involve everyone in Hampshire. But that's where we are focusing our attention, because we really believe that that is where we will have to be focused to meet the targets. So even though they are difficult and will be expensive, we will be trying to do our best to kind of focus our resources outside of what's happening within the departments, so within the climate change team and our partnership, working on those areas that will have the biggest impact. So the 2050 target really reflects that. It's, you know, we can't go any faster on particular projects without the funding, without the kind of infrastructure being put in place by government, and that's unfortunate, but that's the reality of where we are. So I don't know if that helps answer.
Thank you for that. Before I go back to Adrian, I've been trying to work out where the extra hand's coming from, and it's Councillor Judith Grajewski. I'll bring you in now, Judith. Is it on this subject?
Yes, it is, and it's just a quick comment, really. I think one of the obstacles people tell me to having solar panels is that they're not pretty. They interfere with the street scene, and there are planning issues and so forth. But my understanding is that you can now get solar roof tiles, and whilst they are expensive, you can't tell that they're different from ordinary roof tiles. I don't think. I've just had a quick look on Google. So is that the way to go?
Well, it may well be. Thank you for that. It's quite useful information. And I might add, before I bring back Adrian, is that just because we're not a planning authority does not mean that we can't exert influence through our cabinet members or through officers' channels, that districts and boroughs should really ensure that developers are putting in solar panels of some description, which of course they should pay for. It will put up the price of housing, but it's already too expensive anyway, so it'll make no difference. But that's a sort of influence that this sort of committee can put to the cabinet and to full council to do things like that. Otherwise, where do you start? Adrian, back to you for your reply.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Chitra, for those answers and comments. I don't think there's a lot more that I want to add at this stage. Obviously, what you're explaining to us is that this is a first dipping of a toe in the water, and there's a long way to go, well beyond what's currently in the report. And I agree with that and very much support what you're saying there, and wish you well in all your endeavours on this. It's probably the most important subject we're dealing with as an authority. Thank you, Chairman.
Apart from the one that's coming up, okay?
Well, that's
right.
an enabler.
Roger, you've been very patient. Councillor Huckstep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to say, I'm a bit lost where we are in the structure of the questions. I think you started this.
We're on to your subject, okay?
Okay. Well, I've got quite a lot, but I won't burst all of it out now. The first one is paragraph 16 in the paper, page 9 on your iPads, and it's the bullet point that says transport. And I just wondered what you meant by the word active, Chitra. You said transport, active and public transport. What is active meaning there?
Walking and cycling.
Walking and cycling. Okay, that's fine. That's good.
Keep going. This is your chance to shine now, Roger.
I don't have a need to shine. Next, there's next steps for developing the action plan. Now, that table shows a progression from 2020 to 2050 in equal lumps. In other words, it's a linear progression to the goal. Now, I believe in Pareto. So we should be trying to plan to load up front as much as we can in order to achieve the aim, because the last 20% is probably going to take 80% of the effort to do that. That's an observation I'm making. At paragraph 28, you said that, and this of course is a July report, the Carbon Trust will deliver the final stages of work by the end of August. Has that actually happened? It has.
We're still working with them, but yeah, everything that is ready for cabinet. The papers go on Monday. So yeah.
Now the next thing is in July you had 2 positions yet to fill on the team. Has that now been completed?
We filled 1 position. The final position is an apprenticeship and is slightly more challenging to do whilst we're in COVID. But what we're looking to do is probably progress that after this cabinet report when we've got a bit of, well, I say we've got a bit of capacity, but I don't know if we do, but we don't want to bring an apprentice on board without giving them the proper support and training that they will need for that role. So yeah, we will be trying to fill that as soon as possible.
Right. Okay. Mr. Chairman, I think that's enough for me at the time being. I think other people should be allowed to come in, and maybe I can come in a bit later on.
Well, okay, as far as I can see, we've only got one more hand up, and that's Councillor Westbrook. So if you're happy to wait, we'll bring you in afterwards, okay?
Yeah,
so keep your hand up, please, Roger. Okay, Councillor Westbrook.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I want to just say a big thank you to the officers for what was a very comprehensive report. And you've obviously done a lot of work and achieved an awful lot in just over a year, really, since this decision was made. Obviously, you've been working on it for a long time, generally. I wanted to start really when you're talking about the strategic priorities. And it was interesting that the first icon on there is the car, and which takes me straight to my first point of page 15, item 60.7, which talks about responding to the immediate COVID-19 challenge through delivery of pop-up realm public schemes designed to support social distancing, but also to lock in new sustainable travel behaviours. My question is on the public's response to these pop-up schemes. There have been examples of residents being against them without proper consultation. I want to know really, have we learned how we could better promote the reasons and benefits of the schemes, and how under current police resource pressures that pop-up road closures can be enforced and monitored to ensure the safety for road users, because that's been a problem. This is going to have to be resolved long-term with projects if we're going to be serious about climate change. So that's my first point. My second point then goes on to page 79 to do with the carbon reduction action plan and highways maintenance, and on page 79 under materials. And it's talking about a change for all for suitable hot machine laid materials to warm. And it talks about mixers on the highway network, saving electricity. And there are trials underway. Also on page 80, it talks about changing all suitable hot binder course materials to cold lay for use on the highway network. So my question is, how effective in respect of longevity will these repairs or works be, i.e. not much benefit if we're going to have to keep on fixing them? And then I move on to page 82, which is winter maintenance. And you talk about route optimization, which can be achieved with fewer salt runs, less salt purchased, transported, i.e. which I understand that, reduction of air pollution. And my question is, what studies have or will be done before we consider this possibility? We all know that the snarl that we had in bad weather in Basingstoke a year or so ago, when one small section was affected. And my last question for now, Chairman, is on page 84, which is to explore the feasibility of expanding food waste collections to schools. My question is, bearing in mind that some districts don't operate food waste collections for residents, is this something you're looking at in conjunction with districts who may take advantage of the fact that a food waste collection service could be visiting maintained schools within their areas, i.e. food waste could turn up in other areas that it's not currently in via the school method, or at least linked to it with contractors. And I have got one more, Chairman, if you want me to finish off. It's very short.
Chitra, can you take one more?
Well, I was going to say all of the transport questions, I will not be able to answer that for you.
Oh, nice one, nice one.
We have.
Okay.
I think it's a really important point, actually, that the strategy is being delivered by experts across the organisation within each of those fields, because obviously that requires a lot of expertise, as your questions have highlighted. So I would be really happy if you want to drop me an email with those questions. I can forward them on to the relevant officers that are responsible for delivering those actions and get some, good responses for you. I think I would prefer to do that than to give you a generic answer.
Okay, thank you.
Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather have the proper answers. Really would be very useful. I just have one general point, Chairman.
Hold on a second, James Potter, please come in.
Thank you, Chairman. I think Chitra's response is probably right. If we could have those questions in detail, then we'll pass them on to our colleagues so you can get the full picture. But from the pop-ups, to answer that, I think the answer is we are learning as we go. These were the funding that was released by government was done at significant pace, and in order to, shall we say, achieve a sort of put in proposals, get the money, then deliver the pop-up schemes, etc. Yes, I think everyone recognised there probably wasn't the level of local consultation that there could potentially have been, but that was purely due to the timetable that the national government was setting. I think we are learning as we go, and hopefully we're getting sort of better at doing this as we move into the sort of second and third phases of that. I will sort of refer to colleagues with regards to winter maintenance and the change to hot and cold road repairs, etc. With respect to food waste, food waste collections is likely to be mandated as part of the Environment Bill when that comes back to Parliament sometime hopefully later this year, and that will require districts and boroughs to provide a weekly collection service for all residents. Whether or not off the back of that they then offer that service to schools is something we'll have to wait and see, but we also have a corporate contract for the maintained schools if they wish to utilize that. And I would have thought that any future iteration of that contract would include a requirement for food waste collections when it's next tendered. Thank you.
Okay, before I bring you back in, Mike, okay, could we please make sure that whatever replies we get from our transport experts are sent to Louise Pickford so that she can then distribute around the committee? Right, Mike, back to you. Your last question.
Yeah, just really sort of more of a statement, really. I was looking at on page 196, which is the reduced car taxi use by active forms of transport, and it's based on the survey, I think, of about 3,000 people. I think the thing that stood out for me there is the barrier on the right-hand side there, where it says 22% of people say, I do not have time to do this. I would suggest we don't have much time to save the planet, but I certainly think in relation to this is a very important point in engaging with the public, because whatever we do going forward, we certainly need to have something if we're going to get behavioural change in transport modes, to have something that's quick, joined up and convenient that people will use. It's not something that's going to be made difficult, and if things don't join up, people aren't going to do it. It needs to be whatever we do, new builds are fine, but when we've got old established estates and areas where we want to move around and they're not joined up, unless we tackle those seriously and look at ways of maybe, you know, making cyclists safe to get to work. I mean, that's 60 to 80% of people in Basingstoke work in Basingstoke. You know, they could all cycle really. But you know, these are big issues that have been around for some time. But I think in the action plan and looking at what's come back here, for people to say 22% of people say I do not have time to do this is a fair point if you've got a busy life. And I think we need to make that as simple and as easy and clean and neat as possible. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike. Okay, now one or two hands have gone up from previous speakers, so I'm going to go straight to Councillor Latham if he's now connecting with us. Can he unmic or whatever?
No, I'm having problems.
You are. We're not hearing. Yes.
Yeah, okay. I really wanted to come in because there have been references this morning to matters which are relevant to the Regulatory Committee and to clear up perhaps one or 2 points. The first one relates to the Hampshire Mineral and Waste Plan, which was mentioned earlier. That is dated 2013 and has to be reviewed every 5 years. There was a minor review in 2018, but there is a major review of the plan being undertaken this year, which will be reported on by the end of this year. Within that plan, there are 2 points. One particularly relates to climate change. That's paragraph 2. That will be fully updated, taking into account everything that we have been discussed today in relation to how it affects regulatory. Equally, there's a paragraph, policy 24, on oil and gas development, which will also be looked into because I know that was raised as well. As far as solar panels are concerned, those of you who have served on this committee in the past will be well aware that in terms of new schools, solar panels and energy savings always is at the forefront of what we do with all our new schools. And we, within the financial means that we have, we do all we can to make energy savings now. So that is the position with regard to all new school developments. Having said, it was mentioned by Councillor Oppenheimer, he'd like to see solar panels on all schools. I'm sure we'd all like to support that. Councillor Huxted mentioned that it's not possible on all schools. All I would say as far as that is concerned, I'm sure that's something we can look forward to in the future, but I suspect that would come under paragraph 26 of page 10, which is that it is be highly dependent on securing additional funds to do that, and in particular, I would have thought with existing schools, new funding from national government. So those are the only points I wanted to make, Chairman.
All right, I'm going to butt in here and say, look, what's important here, Peter, it's very helpful what you've just said, is that when the Regulatory Committee is dealing with what you would call climate change issues, is there a system of liaison with Chitra's department so that she knows what's going on in your department?
I do not know the answer to that. I would suspect there is, but I can check on it.
James?
She may be able to answer that.
No, James is going to do that.
Chairman, if I may, yes, I would hope so, because both sit under my remit.
I thought they might actually. So that's very helpful, Peter. And James, we can make sure that that information gets cut across, then we're doing the job properly. Okay.
Yes, we will.
It'll be revisited on us at some point. Okay. We have got Councillor Huckstep again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You made it very clear at the beginning when the climate emergency was taken up by the council that you wanted the P&R committee to have full overview of what was going on. And it seems to me that that is actually the monitoring of the action plan. So as a suggestion, which you might want to turn into a recommendation, is that maybe we should introduce a column 7 in the table, so we don't just have a start date, but a target date for completion. A lot of the blocks in the table are still blank, and we've got good reasons from Chitra why that is. But that's why I think that action plan should be a standing agenda item in this select committee, so that we can drive forward by our gentle comments the process. So I put that to you as a possibility. The other thing I would like to see is whether on our website we can't have a climate change page, a current affairs page, if you like, of what's going on climate-wise, which might just prick people's consciences about what is going on in the environment. I mean, for instance, last Tuesday we had news of 42 square miles of ice breaking off off Greenland. We've got a big chunk of ice coming off glaciers in the Antarctic. Some of you may well have seen Sir David Attenborough's programme Extinction, the Facts. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it to you. And those sorts of things have a big impact, actually, on people's thinking about climate. And if we've got it to some extent replicated or referenced in our own website, I hope that would have an impact on nudging people into the behaviour we want to see them doing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very helpful, actually, and thank you for thinking this out, Roger. With reference to the recommendation, I think that as the action plan continues to progress, if we inform Louise Pickford about that, so that's done through officers, okay, we can revisit that action plan anytime we like at the right time through our work program. We just have to be fed that information, because we don't have a crystal ball here. We need to be told when something has progressed, and we can look at it at short notice on our work program. We can just bring it right up into the agenda. Would you be happy with that as an idea, Roger?
I'm very happy with that idea. We just need to keep the finger on the button. And I see Chitra is anxious to say something.
Yeah, I think I just want to be essentially, this is a huge action plan, and it involves hundreds of officers across the organisation. So my team will only be able to monitor the progress against that action plan on an annual basis, because as you can imagine, the process of doing that monitoring across those numbers of actions is going to take a significant amount of time. So there's a kind of difference here between what my team are doing and what the whole organisation is doing. So I think if there are particular actions or particular areas that you want to understand the progression on, see what's happening, then maybe they can be more targeted towards those areas of the organisation, rather than the sort of climate change team that will be doing the overall monitoring for the whole of the action plan for Cabinet.
Thank you, Judah. I don't want bureaucracy to get in the way of the work you're doing, okay? None of us want that. So I certainly will put this on as on our work programme on an annual basis minimum, okay? And if, as Roger has brought up, any burning issues, if I can use that expression, crop up in between, then we can ask you to pop in and talk to us. Is the committee happy with that as a philosophy? Just show your hands. That's pretty good. Okay. Right. Now, I do want to get on to the second item. Bruce.
I'll be able to ask a question, Chair.
Is that Bruce Tennant?
Yes.
Yep.
I just wanted to quickly ask a question. I'm listening with great interest to everyone's comments, and I agree with what everyone's been saying, especially the report. I mean, it's very comprehensive. There's a lot there. It takes a lot of reading to understand all of the issues, and I'm really pleased that I went through with a fine-tooth comb, and things that I was interested in are mostly there. But there's one item that I couldn't quite find, It's to do with off-road cycling because, you know, we talked earlier about encouraging people to use electric vehicles, not have diesel vehicles, etc. But I think off-road cycling is something that the county council can have a direct effect on. And so I just wanted to know what Hampshire County Council is doing with respect to creating more, well, a greater off-road cycling network. And I'm thinking collaboration with district councils on new planning applications is an ideal opportunity. But as Councillor Westbrook said earlier about Basingstoke, that many people cycle to work, I think what puts people could cycle to work. I think what puts people off cycling is mixing with traffic, which is why off-road cycling is so important. And the County Council, I think, does have the ability, maybe not the money, but it does have the ability to create more off-road cycle networks. So that's something I would like to see. And I think what would be really nice with all these action plans is actually what we've achieved. So over time, as these reports are coming out, that we can tick off what we've achieved, because I think that would be very good, because otherwise it's just words. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, actually, thank you, Bruce. I'm quite certain, I have a great feeling that this is not about words. I really feel that we're getting a grip with this, okay? Chitra, do you want to, or James, do you want to reply to that?
Well, I know that we are currently working on a walking and cycling strategy, so I'm pretty sure that that is engaging with the districts on how we can really support people to walk and cycle, and understanding the kind of fears that people have while cycling on sort of roads. But I'm not sure about the off-road. So again, if you want to pass that question through Louise, I can certainly move that forward to the team that's working on the walking cycling strategy and get a full response for you.
You do that, Bruce?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Right, Adrian Collett, lastly.
Thank you, Chairman. It follows on nicely, actually, from the last points that have been made. I wanted to flag up that there's a chap called Dan Raven Ellison who has organised a national campaign called Walking the Slow Ways. He's recruited 10,000 volunteers across the UK to map walking routes between destinations, not necessarily rights of way or beautiful routes, but practical ways of walking from one place to another. And I'm really picking up on Mike Westbrook's point about people quite legitimately saying, I haven't got the time to walk, I need to get in my car and get there quickly. He's trying to put together something that gives people an alternative view of things. And I'd just like to suggest Chitra might want to make sure our rights of way people are aware of that and can link into it, because it does seem like an excellent. The fact that he's got 10,000 people now working on it is quite impressive. Thank you, Chairman.
Well done. Okay, Chitra, is that a yes?
Yes, please. If you could send that information through, I will certainly pass it on to the rights of way. Thank you.
Will do.
Okay, right. I'm very happy to go on to the recommendations, which are A, the County Council's climate change strategy, that we are noting the County Council's climate change strategy from 20 to 25, the Climate Change Action Plan 20 to 25, and to note the details on a range of climate change activities and programs already underway within the Council towards meeting the climate change targets, including the launch of 3 climate change projects. Are we all happy to note that?
Agreed.
Yeah, just put your hands up. Anybody vehemently against that? Okay, just talk to me. Okay, we'll take that as unanimous. So Chitra and Roger, James, sorry, thank you both very much indeed. And again, please, would you thank your team for everything you've done?
Mr. Chairman, are we going to have an extra recommendation about the action plan?
I thought I covered that with you, with the fact that we would look at it annually, because the teacher said that time is a problem, but that if any one of us felt that there was a burning issue, we get Chitra back.
Okay.
And I did ask about it, and they all seem pretty happy with that.
Sorry, if I could just add, Chairman, we could include something on an annual basis within the work programme. So when we get to that item, we can have the discussion there.
Are you okay with that, Roger?
Very happy, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
You sure?
I am sure.
Okay. I want all people happy, okay? Right, officers, thank you very much. You may now leave. We're looking forward to Rob Carr, who has appeared. So thank you very much indeed. Right, on to the next item, which is the other grueling one that we've got to go through. Not the other grueling one, a grueling one that we're going to have to address, okay? The medium-term financial strategy. Could you please give me a second while I get my notes? Right. Rob Carr, Head of Finance, to introduce the report and give a presentation on the medium-term financial strategy update, which was presented to Cabinet at the July meeting. And I won't do a preamble on this, but Rob, please don't, please just give us the facts, and we'll try and recoil from this in the best possible way. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, members. If I could just refer you to page 363 of your ModGov pack, that's where the presentation is contained. I'll just leave you.
Keep going, Rob. We'll find it.
Yeah, that's fine. So first page 364 talks about the financial management position before COVID. I think it's quite interesting to be almost referring back to those as being the good old days. Clearly, we were in quite a strong position and our planning was going well. So we had cash flow support through to the end of 22-23. So our usual strategy of putting money aside to meet the cash flow impacts of savings programs was going well. In 2019-20, obviously, we took a further £140 million out of the budget, and the outturn position for that year was positive. And looking ahead, there was actually some prospect that the period of austerity was over, because we'd had the spending round for 2021, which did actually recognise some of the growth pressures in social care and gave us additional funding. And then the long-awaited fair funding review and business rate retention review were due to come in as part of a further comprehensive spending review, which clearly has been already delayed due to Brexit, but we were expecting that to come in this year. Just moving on to 365. So clearly the impact of COVID has put all of that under pressure. Certainly from my point of view, I've never known a more difficult period for looking at finances, particularly the fast-moving pace of it. Certainly in the early days, trying to get any reliable estimates was very difficult. We used this term snapshot pretty much for everything that we did. Things have settled down a little now. So obviously we were out of that response period. We've got information in terms of actuals that we've got for the early part of the year. And we've been able to sort of take stock on where we are this year and also to do some number crunching for the next 3 years, which is why we put the updated MTFS to Cabinet and County Council in July. So just moving on to the response costs and losses. Again, these are well out of date. So we report to MHCLG on a monthly basis, and by the time we've got the lead-in time for papers, obviously some of those are quite out of date. So the position as at June showed response costs and losses of about 137 million, which was nearly 15 million down on what we'd reported before. I have to say though, at the end of June, we were still in the position of not having any reliable data. And if I look at the updates that we are doing at the moment, so the return that we did for the end of August, what we're tending to see is the response costs and recovery costs coming down. So obviously we were originally assuming a 5-month response period, and it hasn't been that. And obviously we've got actuals for that early part of the year. So we're seeing those response costs coming down. But what we are also seeing is that lost income is going up compared to what we thought previously. So whilst things have returned to normal somewhat, what we are seeing is that the restrictions due to social distancing, individuals' fears about going out, is continuing to have a sort of a longer term impact on our income and some of our trading areas. So for example, schools have obviously just gone back, but we are seeing quite a significant reduction in the number of school meals which are being purchased in that first week. Whether that's just an initial issue or whether that will continue, then we're not quite sure at the moment. But certainly income is one of the areas that we've got to focus on at the moment. Just in terms of we report a current year unfunded costs and losses, so taking all of those things that we put in the MHCLG return, adding in the market underwriting. So whilst the market underwriting is budgeted, so it doesn't cost us anymore, we just want to reflect the fact that we have been supporting certain sectors of the market, certain businesses in order to keep them going, and that has come at quite a significant cost to us. And then we've also added back the loss savings that we predict for 21-22 and 22-23 as a result of the delay in the delivery of our savings programs. So that gives us total costs and losses of just over 188 million, and then we do have some elements that go towards that. So since these papers were done on the 2nd of July, the government did announce a further tranche of £500 million, and the county council share of that was 7.6 million. So our COVID-19 grant allocations have gone up to just over 61 million. We've also, again, had more of an ability to look at what potential savings there might be as a result of COVID-19, and in the latest position that has gone up. And you'll also be aware that the government announced a sales fees and charges reimbursement scheme. So we will submit our first claim for that at the end of this month. At the moment, it's a bit difficult to understand quite how the criteria work, but based on some early work that we've done, we think for the first 3 to 4 months of this year, we might receive about £2.4 million of the income losses that we've incurred in that area. So certainly we would expect that to grow over time. And as is usually the case, my ModGov has disappeared whilst I'm in the middle of doing a presentation. It's been there for 2 hours and it's been fine, but so sorry, I'll just switch to my PowerPoint presentation, which I'd loaded up just in case. So in terms of the unfunded costs and losses, as at the end of June, we were looking at a gap of about 103 million. For the end of August, that has dropped by about 20 million. As I say, mainly as a result of that additional government funding, but also as a result of the additional savings that we've managed to find and identify within the budget. So whilst in the current year the trajectory is going in the right direction, there are still some longer term issues that we need to look at. So in terms of the next page, so within the medium-term financial strategy, what we aimed to do was try to take that current year's net unfunded costs and losses and then project forward for a further 2 years to say, well, what might the position look like that we need to tackle. So the first stab that we had at that came to about 210 million. As I say, that top line has reduced as a result of the latest return, but what we are finding is that there's more pressure coming through in the departmental pressure side, both in adult social care demand, but also we think there could be a potential long-term impact on income into 21-22 at least, which is not taken account of there. Business rates and council tax, to be honest, remains our most complex area. So those figures that are presented there are based on a 5% loss of business rate and council tax income in the current year, which then reduces as we go forward, assuming that things will return to normal over a period. At the moment, billing authorities just cannot provide us with reliable estimates in these areas because there's been so much government support around business rates, around furlough, etc., that it's difficult to know what the true impact on those areas will be. What we've also had is an announcement from the government that they will share in the business rate and council tax losses, but again, we have no information as to at what level they will share, and also whether that's just for 2021 or whether that will go on for future years. So that's something that we're expecting to be announced in the spending review in due course. So in terms of, say, so whilst the top line we do see getting better, there are other elements which are creeping back up. So we still think that sort of 210 million is as good an estimate as any at this stage. So just moving forward to the scenario planning. So what we've attempted to do is to treat that £210 million as a one-off problem. Now the reality is it's unlikely to be, but as we go further into this, it's going to be more and more difficult to split out a COVID impact from the new normal demands and pressures that we face. And then what we've done is to offset against that different scenarios for potential government funding. So scenario 1 assumes nothing. Scenario 2 at the time assumes that we received all the rest of our COVID response costs of 17.8 million. And then scenario 3, we assumed we would also get all of our council tax and business rate income for the current year's losses, which is looking unlikely given that the government said that they're only going to take a share of those losses. So I think if we ignore how we got to that position and just look at we're assuming for scenario 3 that we would receive £52 million worth of additional government support, I think that's the benchmark that we can compare against going forward. And then finally, scenario 4 looked at a worst case scenario for our costs and losses, but still assumed that we got almost our best case for government support. So moving on to the next slide. So the conclusions that we came to within the report is that within all but scenario 3, effectively the county council was not sustainable in the medium term. You will know that in previous updates, probably for 2 or 3 years now, we have been saying that unless the quantum and distribution methodology for government funding changes, the county council was already potentially not sustainable in the longer term. Clearly, this shock of 210 million puts that at even greater jeopardy. I think the other point to make is that even under scenario 3, where we were deemed to be financially sustainable in the medium term, effectively that is raiding everything that we've got. So if there were to be any further financial shocks, we would struggle to deal with those. So even assuming those assumptions, it still requires us to meet all of the T19 and T21 savings. And of course, we can't forget the fact that irrespective of COVID-19, we predict to have at least a £40 million deficit each year, which would mean if we were to do a T23 programme, that would be 80 million. Or if we were in a position, depending on the outcome of the comprehensive spending review, where we were able to delay that to T24, that increases the programme up to 120 million, because obviously we've got another year's worth of losses to meet. So we are in a difficult position, but I think what we do have is the firepower to see us through those early days. So we don't need to make snap decisions at the moment. We can plan our response to the COVID crisis on the back of government announcements. And probably the most important element in that for me is the comprehensive spending review. So if we do get a 3-year review, that will be extremely helpful, because it will be the first time in a long time we've been able to do medium-term planning. My concern is that there are suggestions that might only be back to a 1-year spending review if we continue to get a spike in COVID over the next month or so. But we'll wait to see what happens, and probably the next time we'll have the best information would be in the update that we do for Cabinet in December. So that's it from me, Chairman. Happy to take any questions on those points or the report itself.
Right, Rob, look, thank you very much indeed. I don't suppose anybody here envies the task that you've got in hand. So we'll start by saying thank you very much, and all the best to you and Karen Williamson, okay? Please stay alive, because we need your expertise to keep us out of trouble, okay?
I'll work on that, Chairman, yeah.
Before I bring in the hands, okay, I'm going to use the Chairman's right here, because I've written down 4 points, okay? You said that we're going in the right direction, but the current bad news on a second increasing spike is obviously not going to help matters, is it?
I mean, that's correct. I mean, so our assumptions, which I should have mentioned going forward, are that any future second spike is actually controlled through local outbreak planning, that we don't go into a further lockdown. So clearly a further lockdown would start to have similar response costs and losses that we had for the first 3 months of this year. And that, you know, and that's, we're talking potentially another 100 million there. So that would have a significant impact locally, let alone what it would also do to the national economy.
Okay, thank you for that. The second thing is about lobbying government, which was mentioned in the cabinet papers. Okay, I think one of the things we should be doing is basically saying to the government, for goodness sake, let us charge more than 5% council tax increase for the moment, for us to be able to at least mitigate against some of these awful costs that we've got. Has that been mooted already, Rob?
So it hasn't been directly sent to the government, but of course what we do have is our ability to input into the comprehensive spending review. So as part of our submission to the spending review, council tax flexibility will be one of the things that we're raising.
Because I know we've got Councillor Reid here. That's the sort of thing he needs to be discussing with Keith Manns and at cabinet level for letters to go off to allow us to charge more through this period. It's not an officer job, but it's one that we need to pass through our, include Judith here since she's here, pass on to the cabinet members to discuss. Let's see if I've got this right. We need 52.4 million minimum, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And is it your opinion that the transformation savings program should be postponed for the moment, so let us get on with the business of dealing with the problems we've got?
So the figures that we put into the report in terms of the losses assumed a 6-month delay. But what we've already said to departments is that where that is safe to do so, and where they are able to, that they should continue with those transformation programs, because clearly the longer that we have a delay in those areas, the more it is costing us in terms of cash flow. Because some of those areas relate to transformation to 2019, which is obviously quite some way away now. So we do need those programs to start as quickly as possible, but clearly that needs to take the current circumstances into account.
Forgive me for coming back. What you're saying as an officer, that you have to address this because you've been told that we have to make these savings. If we didn't have to make these savings, so government came back and said, you're off the hook, boys, would that make your job easier?
Always, yes. But I think if you think about transformation to 19 and transformation to 21, those are already based on numbers that we know. So those are gaps that we've been addressing, which are already in place because we know what our grant settlements are. So I think the issue, the likelihood that the government will provide funding to bail us out for those programs is unlikely. What we really need to make sure is that we've got as much funding as possible for the future, so that we're not in the position of having to put in place a T23 or T24 program.
Okay, right. Right, I'm going to start from the top here. Councillor Porter.
Thank you. Actually, that's pretty much what my question was, which was that the point that the money that's lost is effectively single income, but actually by writing 80 million or 120 million, it implies that actually you've solved that, but it's per annum, isn't it?
Yeah, so obviously what
So I believe...
Let him finish, Jackie.
Yeah, go on, Rob.
It's just, so obviously without having any figures for the future, what we do is make an assessment. So we believe that every year the cost of social care increases and inflation is 40 million pound a year. So if we're filling a 2-year gap, it's 80 million. If we're filling a 3-year gap, it's 120.
So you're not actually asking that as per annum figure forever, just for those 2 years, or are you saying that you're saying per annum?
Yeah, so it would have to be 120 million ongoing.
So my feeling is that actually the report should always reflect that, because when the other figures are finite figures and that's a per annum figure, I think that's quite confusing for the public, because they think of it as being, and possibly councillors, because they think of it as being a one-off figure, because we've been discussing one-off figures before that, really.
Okay.
And the second thing is that the promise of money doesn't necessarily create the arrival of money. So it came up in a conversation about money for footpath planning and that sort of thing, cycling and walking, that you get a promise of money, but it doesn't come until later. Is that an issue in sense of they're such usually quite large volume of amounts of money? Does that create a problem in terms of cash flow, or do we just use our, how do we use our reserve for achieving that? And does it affect the interest we receive because of what we're doing to our reserve to break into it?
So in my presentation, I referred to the fact that we were happy that we had sufficient cash flow to see us through to the end of 22-23.
Right.
In meeting the 210 million, what we've said is in order to be financially sustainable, we still have to be able to cover those losses up to the end of 22-23. So there's no good using up all of the cash that we've got in the next 12 months, because then we have no way of achieving our normal savings programs as we do at the moment. So in dealing with that 210 million, that assumes it leaves us in the same position we would have been if COVID had never happened. So we've still got that cash flow up until at least the end of 22-23 in order to enable us to look at the next phase of savings programs.
So was that borrowing?
No. So that's real cash that effectively we've got invested, and we would take out of the investments in order to use it. In terms of your point about the promise of cash, obviously as part of the comprehensive spending review and the annual settlement, if the government says they're going to give us an extra £20 million next year for social care costs, as they did for 2021, then that does come through as a grant. So that's pretty much 100% guaranteed if it's within the settlement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. You can come back later. Councillor Westbrook.
You're on mute, Councillor Westbrook.
Buttons packed in again. So can you hear me now? Yep. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Rob. On the previous agenda item, we thanked officers for the great work they did on the reports and how difficult it was been to produce such a comprehensive report in just over a year. What you guys have done, and your colleagues, in the last 6 months is nothing short of outstanding. It's a very difficult job that you have, and I'd like to thank you for all the work you're doing, and everybody else. I think the report, I've not got exactly any particular questions, but the report itself highlights a number of points. It talks about the complex nature of forecasts, and in essence, we must treat all of the forecasts in this report as high risk in nature. That's obviously a given. And to me as well, it talks about the 2 metre social distancing rule in point 98, and the difficulties that's given the council in relation to the goalposts being moved. Okay, government maybe never had much choice, and it's a very fluid situation with COVID, but I can appreciate, you put everything in place, and the costs involved in moving everything, is huge. I'd like to also point out as well in the report, which, it's a bit of deja vu plus really, where you talk about when the financial officers in a report write warnings in capital letters and exclamation marks. We need to be in capitals, very concerned, exclamation mark. I think we as councillors and as the public as well, generally in Hampshire, need to be in capitals, very concerned, exclamation mark. And I think really, I have got one question just to round that off really. I read this morning that the council chief executives across the country were addressed on the 15th by Robert Jenrick from MHCLG. And during that call, they were interrupted by the Prime Minister. We've heard of Richie Sunak's, the Chancellor's views in the past about helping councils out, and also Robert Jenrick's promises. But the Prime Minister apparently in this call, and I don't know whether if it's been fed back or it's true, said that he thanks councils for all that they've done, and that the sector will have his full support in the months ahead. I wonder if there's any strength in that promise, and do we feel that means that there's going to be some more money on the horizon?
So I wasn't aware of that. I think if you look at the way things have developed, throughout the crisis. So initially we were given the COVID grant, and originally that was sort of supposed to cover everything. But as we've gone through and the government, I think one of the points that I would make is that this has given an opportunity for government to better understand some of the pressures that local government has always been under. So effectively that grant has now moved into being a grant towards the response costs that we had in the early part of the process. One of the things we then flagged with the government is, yes, but we've also suffered losses of income. So they brought in the sales fees and charges reimbursement scheme to address that particular issue. So whilst that's not giving us 100% of our losses back, it is 75% after you've taken off that first 5% top slice. And then finally, we have flagged to them that there are ongoing pressures within losses of council tax and business rates, and they've said that they'll address that as part of the comprehensive spending review. So I think it would be fair to say on this occasion that they have been listening to the sector and they have been putting things in place as we've gone. I think the problem is for us is the worry that most of those relate to the current financial year, and yet we expect the impact of COVID to go on for 2 to 3 years. And what we wouldn't want is for that to be forgotten. So that needs to be reflected in any settlement that we get in the future as well.
Mike?
No, is that work this time? Sorry. Yep. Yeah, no, thanks, Rob. It is very difficult and it's fluid. I mean, we've got the same situation with businesses, haven't we, with the furlough scheme coming to an end the end of October, I believe. And where the government goes after that, nobody knows really. And I think it's just a case of suck it and see where we are. But it's a huge problem, and it's every council. And I mean, from what I can see, what our officers have done and the position we're in, we're probably maybe one of the more fortunate ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, Councillor Collett.
Thank you, Chairman. 2 points. One is a clarification point on the answer Rob gave to Jackie Porter's question. The £40 million per annum for social care, my understanding of that is that each year the total cost is expected to increase by 40 million. So you need to find 40 million in year 1, 80 million in year 2, 120 million in year 3, not 120 million just over the 3 years in total. Have I misunderstood that?
No, so I think you're right. So it is cumulative, but what we do, I think if you take the 2-year position, so for T21, that covers the expected gap in 2021 and 21-22. But in order to give ourselves the time to meet that £80 million worth of savings, we use cash flow to meet the deficit in 2021 and then deliver the full £80 million worth of savings to cover 2 years in 21-22. However, that is a recurring amount of savings that we need to make. It's not just 40 million each year.
Thank you. That is what I understood the situation to be. Thanks for clarifying that. My only real question goes back to the scenario planning, and there are 4 scenarios you've set out. And as ever, your reports are really clear and really, really helpful. But you made the point that 3 of the 4 scenarios lead to us being not viable, and the only one that would lead to viability is scenario 3. Which is further government funding to meet all COVID-19 response, recovery and demand costs, and underwriting for council tax and business rate income from the current year's losses. That being the case, and being totally in the hands of government to deliver that in order to make sure that we are viable for the future, how active are Hampshire MPs being in making sure the government understands this and delivers what we need for long-term viability?
I don't know if that's a question for Rob, but if any of our executive members want to answer that, because Councillor Manns would have been the person to answer that, but I don't know if Stephen Reed's got an answer for that. Stephen? Okay.
Yes,
how about...
Excuse me for having to press some buttons there, Jonathan. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I think the answer I can give, and I think it is a very good question from Adrian Collett, is that Keith is regularly in touch with the local MPs and giving them briefings on the situation, and they will be aware of it. Now, how much they then go on to use the information that we give them, I'd have to talk to each of them individually, but rest assured that they are being given the information.
You want to come back on that, Adrian?
Well, no, I totally get the point that that's as much as Stephen can say to us today. But we are very much dependent on our MPs fighting for us in these current circumstances.
Stephen says, good question. I would send an email directly to Keith Manns on that one.
I think it's a perfectly valid point to have come out of this meeting, Jonathan. And yes, it would be right to feed that up. We are going to be in the hands of national government to solve the problems that have been thrown at us by COVID. We are going to be not the first council, I think, in the queue and at risk of insolvency, as it were. And it's the last thing that the government wants, because they would still have to pick up the tab if that were to happen.
And that'd be a lot more expensive.
That's the political fallout.
Right. Okay. Look, can I leave that one with you, Adrian, to do an email for all of us? You know, so it's got to be generic.
Chairman, if I may, as I did mention, I think in the response to Jackie Porter, probably more than ever, from the reporting that we're doing through the various different treasurer societies, the engagement that we've now got with HM Treasury and MHCLG is probably greater than we've ever had. So I think it's useful that the MPs would also echo that, and that we write and flag these things. But actually, I'd probably say that their understanding of our position is probably greater than it's ever been. And you may also be aware that they have specifically asked that any individual authorities that think they may be in the position of having to issue a Section 114 notice speak to MHCLG and the Treasury in the first instance.
Okay, thank you both, and thank you, Stephen, for that. I'm just going through the list. Actually, we've got Peter Latham now, and unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, no, you're back on mute, Councillor Latham.
Lost it again. Is that better?
That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Firstly, Rob, thank you for what you've done. Thank you for the reports. I think that really, until we know exactly what we're getting from central government in terms of their annual sums, which normally come through in either September or December, and until we know what we get in the comprehensive spending review, all of this as to future expenditure and income is mere conjecture. And we will know probably in January, February of this year, when we set our budgets, more clearly where we are financially at the present time. As I see it, the only option that one can realistically look at, which is to some extent favourable, is option 3. And that is dependent on central government coming up in due course with the costs of recovery costs, which is 17,000, and the loss of council tax and business rate, which is 35,000. So that's a total loss. We're short of 52,000, and we'll have to wait and see whether or not we get any of that back, which is needed in order to comply or in order to achieve option 3. And we are fortunate, I think, in the sense that as a council, we haven't spent our reserves. Thank goodness we've still got them. And that this is a position as to sustainability, which is only going to arise effectively at and in 23-24, because we can maintain our services up until then, and it is only then that our real problems and viability will arise if we don't see that finance. So is there anything, Rob, that I have said that is incorrect? It seems to me we are dependent, as Councillor Reid has said, on what we receive from central government in the spending review, the annual review and the spending review. And equally, we also need to get into the 80,000 comprehensive spend, the spending review that we need for T21, the 80,000, in order to reduce our overheads there. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Right. Okay.
Well,
Thanks for that.
as ever, Peter, your forensic brain is working overtime. Thank you.
Cheers.
The only correction, Mr. Chairman, is that 4,000 read a million.
Yeah.
Did I say 4,000?
You were saying thousands all the way
million.
through.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
I apologise for Councillor Huckstep. He's very picky, isn't he? Right. But he has shone again. All right. Who's next? Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, county councils have suffered more greatly, perhaps, due to their social care responsibilities. Obviously, huge costs there. I just wondered, from the officer's point of view, do they know how we compare to other county councils in a similar vein, and also how we compare to how unitaries have got on in this period? They might have more leeway to juggle money. I don't know if they can do that better than we can, but they've got more departments and whatever. But I also wondered, is there now any, from an officer's point of view, looking, especially after what Peter just said about, after a couple of years we're going to be in real trouble, is there value now looking at creative reorganisation of Hampshire's layers of council, and is it the right time to think about it? I know we're in a crisis situation, but should we be acting now, looking right ahead in that respect?
Rob?
It's just taking those in order. So yeah, so I do quite a lot of work locally with local county councils, so Kent, Essex, Surrey, etc. Really as a cross-check to make sure that none of us are any outliers in terms of some of the costs that we've been facing. And actually it's been quite useful to check with them when we've, for example, done an estimate of what the increase in homeschool transport costs might be, and everybody else has got a completely different view. So that enables us to sort of cross check against them, and basically no, we're pretty much in line with those other county councils. I think we're all experiencing similar problems. Where we do differ is our approach to the medium term position, where we've effectively tried to keep COVID as a one-off issue to deal with. A lot of the other councils are sort of mixing that together for their future budget positions. I think that's probably because we've already started and are quite a long way into our T21 programme for 21-22. A lot of other councils haven't even started thinking about it, so I think it's probably just a difference in approach. In terms of unitary councils, actually, probably to be fair, they are faring worse than us. So not only have they had the response costs and also got the problems of council tax and business rates, they've also got many more local sales fees and charges income, which they're losing as well. So similar to districts, which is one of their biggest issues, and also unitaries, because they're not as big as us, have not had the capacity that we've got in order to absorb some of those losses. So I do know that there are quite a few that are potentially struggling for next financial year in particular. In terms of reorganisation point, I guess what we really need to wait for on that one is the devolution white paper. It would seem premature to do anything before that comes out, and of course I understand that there is now a potential delay in that devolution white paper coming out.
Thank you, Rob. Before I bring you back, Fran, I just said what a good argument for maintaining the status quo. Very helpful from an officer. Okay, Fran, back to you.
No, I haven't got anything else. It's just interested in how other councillors have done. I just think for the long term, I can't see any other way that we will. I hope that, you know, things can be sustained past the next 2-3 years, but with the exclamation marks, it's very worrying. And I just think that we have to look at creative ways that we could come together and share resources. But I'll save that for another argument, another day.
Thank you, Fran. Okay, right, we're on to Councillor Westbrook.
You're on mute, Councillor Westbrook. Well, it doesn't show you as mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Machine's playing up today, I think, and the button. Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Rob. I mean, you may well have touched on this already, but I wanted to go back to page 312 of the original report, which talks about the returns and assumptions to local government. And it's talking about the common operating picture. And there was an awful lot of issues in the beginning, I think, as highlighted in your report, about different councils having different returns, obviously giving a very, very different picture to government about what the issues are. I appreciate that some councils will have different things to us, you know, in different areas and different issues on their returns. But I wondered if that is sort of uniformed in some way now, and you may well have touched on this, so that government's got a clearer picture of what's happening to local authorities and the pressure they're under, really, because obviously that, you know, that doesn't help if everybody's not singing off the same hymn sheet.
Yeah, so certainly from my point of view, I think when you look at the end of June figures, we were still in the position of not really knowing, you know, whether or not our assumptions were correct. So at that point, we were still assuming a 5-month response period. And if I take something such as PPE, which has obviously been a big issue, we were spending £1.6 million a month on PPE. So we'd obviously projected that forward. When we look back now at what we spent on PPE during that period, and obviously that initial response period has stopped now, it actually turned out to be £3.6 million in total. So it's still a significant sum, but well short of the 8 million that we were, you know, predicting around those times. So I have a lot more confidence. We're almost not into scenarios now. We're into, we understand what our response costs and losses were for that period. Recovery costs don't seem to be too significant at the moment in terms of specific costs around recovery. A lot of it is just, you know, actions that we are taking. I think the biggest unknowns at the moment is the long-term impact on sort of sales fees and charges income, and also, as I said, council tax and business rates. So some of our trading areas are also a little bit complex, particularly the ones that deal with schools, because again that has been still affected around social distancing, so home to school transport, provision of school meals, those sorts of things are still quite complex areas.
Sorry, back to you, Mike. Was it you? Was that?
Is it working now? Is it working now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, just to come back, Rob. So I guess that sort of ties in. Your explanation sort of ties in more with what you said about the 210 million as being a one-off. It's starting to be absorbed into everyday life, really, because the longer this goes on, I guess, the more it becomes everyday life and the new normal for some time. It looks like so. Yeah,
that is a really good point, and I think it's something that we'll need to take into account as we get into an MTFS for next summer. As you say, are those income losses temporary but medium term, or are they with us forever from now?
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Okay, on to you, Councillor Collett.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to pick up on the question that Councillor Carpenter raised about how unitaries are doing. And just to reflect back some 20 years now, when I worked in the Chief Executive's office at West Berkshire Council, which was a fairly newly created Berkshire unitary at the time. And I was a member of Hampshire County Council by night, if you like, and worked at West Berkshire during the day. And the comparison was very stark when financial challenges came along for West Berkshire Council, they really struggled. When they came along for Hampshire County Council, similar challenges, we had much more flexibility and ability to deal with those things and find solutions to them. So I learned a very early lesson then, and I've observed the Berkshire Unitaries since then really struggle on things that we managed to find solutions to much more easily. Just an observation, Chairman.
That's very helpful of you, Adrian. Of course, that's a very good reason for maintaining our reserves. Right. I presume Rob would agree with that.
That's not what I'm saying.
Right. Rob, you're happy to take that as an accolade, okay?
Yeah, I'll take that, Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Porter.
Two or three things really. One, the impact this is likely to have on investment. A lot of what we've been discussing in the previous paper has a potential through investment, and I wondered whether we should be just really pressing on with that capital expenditure to achieve what we're hoping to do, and perhaps new fees and charges. The second one is about IT kit for home working. Actually, I don't think I'm using mine to the fullest example, but the staff I'm sure are. But actually, as time goes on, do we need to provide more kit to the staff, such as good chairs, good lighting, that sort of thing? And has that been factored in? And the third one is about traded services. I particularly raise school services, including school meals. I notice we're putting them up by 10 pence, but in the like of what Felicity said at our meeting here, I think in February, that this was a challenge, or possibly it was a July meeting, it was that this is a challenge. So that's an example of a traded service where we may well make a large loss. And in paragraph 59, you've talked about those likely traded losses. Does that mean that we could end up charging people more?
So just take those in order. So capital investment. So we are continuing with our existing capital program. So we've not stopped with that. And actually, generally, our experience with contractors has been good. So we're not seeing big price hikes as a result of the COVID impact. So that's pretty good. I guess where we have got the difficulty is any future investment. Clearly, with a £210 million gap to fill, it's difficult to see where we can find the money for additional capital investment, particularly as you'll have seen within the MTFS report. One of the options for closing the 210 million gap is to take money out of the capital payments reserve to meet the gap and to borrow on top of that. Now, clearly, that borrowing is not without a cost going forward, so that does limit our ability for new capital investment. IT kit, yep. So I think we've done quite a lot to enable staff to work more effectively. But from what I hear from my own staff, there are still people who have restrictions on their ability to work from home, whether that's due to the size of their house or the ability to have a proper room. And certainly as we get into the winter and darker nights, darker days even, that there may be issues around lighting, etc., which we need to look at. And I think one of the things we'll need to look at is if home working becomes the norm in the future, or even part of the norm in the future, what steps we will need to take to make sure that staff are as safe working at home as they are working in the office. So yes, certainly something that we need to look at. Traded services, again, the way we're treating those at the moment is to deal with the fact that there is a one-off problem. So particularly for this financial year, the losses that we quote include the potential traded losses of those services that deal with schools. I think then going forward, it points to the fact that if we see a long-term drop in school meals as a result of COVID, that starts to impact on the overall viability of the service, not just for HC3S, I might point out, but for any private sector provider of those services to schools. I think it calls into question, the viability of that service long term. So again, it's definitely something we would need to look at, but at the moment we are treating that as a one-off problem.
Thank you, Jackie.
No, I think that's fine as an answer, but I think we were seeing a bit of a drop off before, but also it's about the whole of the traded services, really, isn't it? And as you say, it'd be interesting to monitor that and see if it does actually pick up again, or whether it's going to be the airline syndrome that it's never going to come back. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jackie. Right. That's it for questions. We've had quite a good debate on a really serious issue. Rob, before I thank you, we have our last Policy and Resources meeting on the 5th of November. Is it likely that anything might happen? Because we know things move very fast in this area. That something may happen which should qualify you to come back and do an update for us, a mini update.
So I think other than the reporting that we do through to Cabinet, I can't see, I don't expect there to be anything. So it would depend on what happens with the spending review and the comprehensive spending review. But the latest information that we had on that was probably more likely to be the back end or the middle of November. So unlikely to be anything significant. But in these days and times, who knows?
Okay, because I won't recommend it goes on to a work program for this coming meeting, the next coming meeting. But can I leave it between you and Louise that if you think there's something you need to report to us in person by November, to just please liaise with Louise, and you're most welcome to come and attend.
Yeah, that's fine.
And it doesn't have to be a lengthy one like this. It's an update from today onwards, sort of thing.
I think Councillor Reid might want to come in.
Yep. Stephen.
Yes, it was just something that I think it was one of the last questions that was asked about HC3S, the school meal service. That the school meal service has acquitted itself really well during the COVID crisis, and some schools which had gone to private companies actually got bailed out by HC3S when the private companies were not able to respond as they wanted. But I think we should note, and it's been reported, that HC3S was moving into a difficult financial position before the COVID lockdown, and we're uncertain as to how we're going to come out of it. So there is going to be a significant problem, and the need for officer and member input for the school meal service. But it's been performing admirably during the crisis.
Very helpful of you, Stephen. Thank you very much indeed. Now, at this point, Rob, I'd like to thank you, and we'll just go to the recommendation, everybody, which is page 301, that the Policy and Resources Select Committee notes the contents of the medium-term financial strategy update report, and that all the comments that we've made will be taken on board by Rob Carr, our head of finance. Are we all in agreement with that being noted? Just wave your hands. Adrian, do you want to wave your hand?
Well, Chairman, I don't disagree with that. It just seems a rather inadequate response, and I'm trying to think what the response should be, more than just noting it. But well, I guess that's probably all we can do.
Adrian, you've had an hour and a half to think of it. Right?
Yes.
That was a majority. Okay. Right. Look,
but it just seems rather inadequate.
Right. Of course, it's inadequate, but what can we do? It's going to go to Cabinet. Does it go back to Cabinet soon, Louise?
So it's been that. So those reports have been to Cabinet. Obviously, there is a further update to the September Cabinet meeting.
Right, Rob. Look, thank you and your department very, very much for all you've done. As I said, I don't envy the position you're in right now. You're right at the front end of this, and we do rely on you. So, as Councillor Porter has text, thank you very much for all you've done.
Thank you, Chairman.
Right, I'm sure this will be quick. The next item is the work programme. We've talked about it quite a lot during the meeting. You can see the work programme report. As I've always said, is there anything you'd like to add to it, ladies and gentlemen, would you please do so? And otherwise, you can rely on Louise, myself, and Keith Evans to keep it running. A show of hands will do for that, if you're happy with that.
Councillor Glenn, before we do, could I just say that we wanted to, did we want to include an item on the action plan?
Yes.
It coming back at some point, no timescales, but just put it on so it's not forgotten.
No, thank you for reminding me. I thought, of course, I'd covered that at the time, but we'll include the climate change action plan. That's a good start. Is it all right with everybody? Anybody want to make a comment? Okay, things it's either goodbye or I agree. Okay, right.
Did Councillor Collett want to say something?
I hope not. Adrian.
I'm going to disappoint you, Chairman. I'm just looking at the programme and the agenda for the next meeting, and apart from the crime and disorder annual item, the only thing we've got on the agenda is a COVID-19 financial update, and Rob Carr's just told us he's not necessarily going to be able to tell us a lot more at the 5th of November meeting. So are we going to have a thin meeting, or?
Well, no, it won't be. There'll be because we do think of items that I think actually an update on COVID services might be a better way of bringing it to the attention of the P&R committee.
That would be sensible.
Yeah. But if you give us leeway on that, it's very difficult to think of all of this sort of stuff at the end of a long meeting, when people are trying to get onto something else. But I think I'll discuss it with Keith and Louise to make it more of a COVID-19 update of what we've been doing on the County Council. It'll be very much, I suppose, the work of the HASC at the Monday meeting, which I'm afraid I didn't get to. And I know they're doing a great job, but I think we need to know about it. And the other issue that I'd like to maybe bring in is to talk about the investment policy on the local government pension scheme. We have a very, very clever pension panel, which Peter Latham is also on. And people have really picked up a lot of information about how investments are run. But as I said, ESG, which is environmental, social and government compliance, is getting stronger and stronger, and people are going to have to comply with it. And that's all part of climate change. So that we may bring that in as an issue for the P&R committee. I think you'll find that fascinating. Lots of hands going up. Are you all saying goodbye? Westbrook, Carpenter, Huckstep, Collett, Porter. You can't all have an opinion at this time of the afternoon.
Oh, sorry.
Very quickly, Mr. Chairman, if I can just say, page 378, the very last page of the work programme, we do have a row that says overview regular updates, and the issue is climate change strategy updates. So all you need to do, I think, is amend that entry as climate change strategy and action plan updates, and the job is done.
Happy to do that. Happy to take that on, as everybody else is. Good. Other hands?
Yeah, it's Councillor Carpenter here, Jonathan. I'd just be quite interested to know a little bit about the LEPs, feedback about the work of the LEPs would be interesting to me.
Yes, we had that before. You're dead right. We might revisit that. Okay, have you got a note of that, Louise?
I have, Chairman. Thank you.
Right, we'll go down this.
Chairman.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Louise, because at the end of the last meeting, I asked for the consultation policy to be brought back on, and it's back on there, which I'm grateful for. I think it still says to be timed in the future, but obviously with all the consultation or lack of it at the moment, I think it's going to be something we're going to learn a lot through this about consulting with residents, and I think it's something we might be wanting to look at going forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, look, thank you for those ideas. Councillor Porter, is your hand still up, or you've just forgotten to put it down?
No, it's up. No, it's up. I'm just going to say that we also, if you are liked next time, the conversation about broadband seems particularly pertinent in the light of us all having to carry on these meetings. And I believe that there's a time-limited issue that they're trying to get people to sign up for the faster broadband before next April. So the January date might be quite late for that conversation.
All right. Good point. Thank you for that. And Louise, please take note. I'm taking notes here, Louise.
I am. Thank you. Thank you.
Good ideas. Any more? He said, "Are you putting your hand down now, Councillor Porter?" Good. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted with the way the meeting has gone today. There's been some really good debate, good drilling down, and some great questions, and a good job's been done today. The problems have not gone away, but that's our job, is to keep addressing them. And I'd like to close the meeting and thank you all very much, especially Louise Pickford. And have a good afternoon. The weather's beautiful. Cheerio.